Hey everyone, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development, your host of Sales and Cigars. So today's the first episode in a series that we're going to do with Matt Anderson. And Matt's a marketing, I'm going to say marketing genius. He's got this process that he uses to facilitate that really helps business owners from that mid-size range up to understand what their brand represents, to understand how to talk to their real customers, how to engage with them in this confusing marketing, this nebulous thing that's out there. So the series is going to be how to think about marketing, similar to the series I do with Nate Tudis called How to Think About Sales. We're going to get into some of the details about what business owners need to think about, and that they have their core story. It's already in them. But the way marketing usually works is that they don't, the people that we work with, that they don't really have the understanding of how to pull that out of that entrepreneur, of that CEO. And they just go about doing these tactics that work sometimes and sometimes don't. And not that anybody doesn't know what they're doing, but it's like if we have this game plan and that's what we work with, we can adjust as we need to, just like in a football game. The coach has a game plan. They know what they want to do. They know what kind of team they have. They know what they can do and what they can't do. They know their strengths and weaknesses, and they play to those strengths. Even though sometimes they get put on their heels, they adjust and can move forward. And that's what this series is going to be about, talking about that game plan for marketing. So go grab a cigar, strap in for another great episode of Sales and Cigars with Matt Anderson. Thank you. So Matt, welcome to Sales and Cigars. I appreciate you jumping on and starting this series with me.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to our conversations.
So we're gonna, just to give the audience just a little bit of background, we're gonna do a series on how to think about marketing from the perspective of an entrepreneur, business owner, CEO, and even we'll probably sneak in a little bit about what salespeople should be thinking about, how their messaging can be improved along the way. And we're gonna do these once a month. They'll drop on Thursdays, and it'll be a regular thing until we run out of stuff to talk about.
Well, that's great. I'm looking forward to it.
So why don't you give a little background? You've got an interesting journey. Why don't we talk about? I don't know if you decided when you were 10 years old this is what you wanted to do when you grew up, but
No, I'm a marketer by accident. I never expected to now have spent, more than 20 years mostly in my career doing marketing. I growing up, I read a lot of biographies, so I was especially captivated by Abraham Lincoln. So I just kind of, when you're a little kid, they ask you what do you want to be when you grow up. After I read the Lincoln biography, I said I wanted to be a lawyer. I got involved in debate in high school, and then that led to a college scholarship to do that at the school that I went to. And that just seemed to really kind of verify that track. My mind seemed to work well, and creating those kinds of arguments, and
words, right?
yeah,
Words are important.
words are incredibly important. And I was really good with logic, and I had some pretty good with math too. But so I just figured that's what I was going to do. And applied to law schools as I was graduating college, and had admissions to some good ones, and decided that, but I was nominated for a scholarship, the kind that can kind of make your career if you get it, and I had to postpone thoughts of law school to see how that turned out, and I didn't end up getting it, but that then meant that I had a year on my hands, and one thing led to another, and I fell into some consulting work, and that started to plant the seed that the skills that made me good at debate and probably would have made me a good lawyer maybe had some more creative applications. So this company that I was working for had made an acquisition that got them in financial trouble, and kind of the key asset that they had were a number of patents that the owner had developed, but had never taken to market. So my job became to wrap some marketing around it, get it out to trade shows, launch these inventions, and eventually one of them hit and made everyone whole, which was great. And so the company was.
What town was this in? What part of the world?
This was in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Okay.
So that's where I grew up. I never expected to go back there after school, but it's funny how circumstances work out. And so that kind of got the wheels turning. And over the course of the next couple of years, I, kind of came to the conclusion that the world didn't need another lawyer, and that I could do some more creative things as well. And during that time, I started apprenticing to a direct mail copywriter. And so I worked on a number of fundraising packages for large national nonprofits, political campaigns, social causes, things like that. And a lot of the work actually came through a guy named Richard Viguerie, who, if people recognize that name, has been credited with maybe being the most important influence in getting Ronald Reagan elected. He kind of pioneered the development of direct response advertising in political circles. And so I did that for a couple of years, but didn't see a huge future in direct mail advertising for myself. I was good enough at it to recognize that the handful of people who were really great at it had skills that I wasn't going to be able to replicate. And so I ended up taking a job at a brand agency doing strategy work. And it was kind of a shock going from one world to the other. In direct response advertising, the basic idea was that all that money they spend on Super Bowl ads and TV commercials and so that they're just flushing it down the toilet. They're just getting their name out there, and it doesn't really do anything. You need to persuade people to buy. And then as soon as I got to this brand agency, it's like, yeah, that direct response stuff, yeah, maybe it works for small companies, but and for a time, but you really need to build a strong relationship between the customer and the company, and that brand advertising is really a lot more effective. Being kind of a curious guy and not having ever trained in marketing, I to this day have never taken a marketing class. My degree is in politics and history, and read a lot of psychology and literature and stuff like that. I decided I needed to kind of get to the bottom of this tension between the direct response world and the brand advertising world, because I had seen both tactics work, and had worked with really brilliant people who were adamantly convinced of their view of the world. And so that really started a process that during the recession in 2008, to kind of fast forward, the strategy work that we did at the brand agency, like the $75,000, $100,000 engagement just to start to figure out what the brand is and some big idea, I would call it the go away and be brilliant model. All of a sudden, even the big Fortune 500 clients didn't really want to fund those efforts, as the economy was imploding. So I was able to take this interest in kind of resolving the tension between direct response and brand advertising to start to create a facilitated strategy model. Because we decided, hey, if we actually help the clients come to some of the strategic decisions themselves, maybe we can deliver a better product, and we can certainly do it within the budgets that they have. And so the system that I helped develop became fairly successful for our brand projects. Really, I've been carrying that forward over the last 15 years of my career, adding layers and nuance and developing some new tools. And so to this, at this point, I think I've kind of developed a synthesis of marketing ideas and an approach to thinking about marketing that works for most businesses most of the time, and B, actually helps take advantage of some of the opportunities that are presented in the digital world today. That's kind of the long story short, how I got to doing what I do right now. Over the course of those 15 years, I've done marketing for my own companies as an entrepreneur and a partner in a number of joint ventures. I've worked for other agencies. I've held director and VP roles at $100 million companies. And I really find working on my own with clients to help them find their marketing vision and fix their message so that their internal marketing teams and agencies can be successful is really a sweet spot for me. And so I do that on a consulting basis and as a fractional CMO.
So and that you have the credentials, you have the background, you're perfect fit for this model that I'm trying to create here of how to think about marketing and bringing. We'll talk about some of the challenges that I hear from CEOs. We'll talk about some of my own challenges that getting the messaging right and having it resonate with the right people and niching that down rather than trying to speak to everybody. There's a great theme, and when we sort of reconnected recently, that helped. It's just a thing that I wanted to do that I think at least the audience that I have and the client base that I have, marketing is this nebulous thing that they throw money into,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of hope involved, and your approach is more of a framework that allows somebody to go from this nebulous thing to something structured, and then you can add pieces and bolt on other things. But you're working off of this framework that is speaking to the right people. So I'm. I don't think we're going to run out of things to talk about.
No, no, I don't think so. It's a pretty big topic.
So I know we've talked about I mispronounced his name, but when we first met, that was one of the things that you mentioned to me was Robert Cialdini, or you can pronounce it maybe better than I can.
Yeah, I've heard it pronounced Cialdini, Cialdani, something like that, something Italian.
His last name is as hard to understand for a guy like me as the books that he's written and the depth of what he's talking about, right?
Yeah.
He's a genius when it comes to understanding how you connect marketing, messaging, and people's minds, how all that works together. And he's done some pretty impressive things. He's still a professor, right?
Yeah, I
While
think
he's
he's now like professor emeritus. When he was starting his work in the late 70s, I think he was a professor of psychology at Yale. And then I think at some point he decided sunshine was in order and moved over to the West Coast.
he was at Stanford too, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the things that you turned me on to his stuff. You said, just go read his things. And you thought I was smart enough to get all that. And it just opened up my brain to like thinking about this differently, sort of the start. And I'll go back and revisit some of his material from time to time, just to kind of confuse myself even more.
Yeah.
But can you maybe, and it's a lot of there, but can you help in sort of encapsulate for a business owner why that big ideas and how that psychology really plays into what a business owner is trying to do is sell a product or service and help their customers move the
Yeah,
needle?
totally. So, I think the reason I recommended Cialdini, I have trouble pronouncing it too to you.
Let's just call him
It's
Robert.
Yes, yes, and it's spelled Cialdini, in case people are wondering why we struggle with it.
I'll have it in the show notes.
Yeah, but what he did is over the course of several years, became really interested in how persuasion works. And so what he did is he basically shadowed top performing salespeople in the top performing sales organizations. And he wrote down everything they said. And, one of the case studies is this door to door salesman who, outsold everyone else like 5 to 1, 5 times the next best selling door to door salesman at this company. And what he did in his book Influence is he discovered that there were certain psychological triggers that words could activate that almost like an automated computer program. He calls it like click whir. You trigger this psychological trigger, and the person is almost compelled to buy. as if they're unthinking and reactive. So, that's a really powerful ability to have if you're a salesperson, right?
Hmm.
And it's also incredibly powerful to understand what these psychological triggers are if you're a marketer. So, kind of the first big idea there is that people are susceptible to influence. They make decisions subconsciously and then rationalize it with their cognitive powers, right?
Yep.
And so, if you want to sell something effectively, what you say and how you comport yourself and all the different things you can do to influence someone, whether it's the design of your logo or it's the colors you use or the typeface or the stories you tell, all of those things can work at a subconscious level to prepare a customer to be ready to buy your product or service. So it has a lot of practical utility. In fact, it's so practical that both Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger say it's the most important book any business person should ever read. So that's pretty high praise, and that's how I discovered it at first. But you said that one of the challenges for sales organization and for many of the people in this audience is that marketing is somewhat nebulous, right? You throw money at it, you need a website, you should do ads. Maybe you want to do social posts and stuff like that. There's for most people, marketing is just a list of tactics that you kind of know. Yeah, we should do some social, we should do some website, we should do some advertising. But how does that actually add up into a vision that results in profits? And psychology is partly the answer to it. So one of the reasons that I had this challenge of making sense between the direct response training I got at first and then the practices of the brand agency that I joined later was that the way most marketers think about marketing is they have different strategies, specific strategies that have worked for other people, and then they apply them to new situations, thinking that it ought to work in this situation. So, the people at the brand agency came up through large advertising agencies. They learned that telling a funny story on a TV ad might influence sales. And they experience, because they're designers, that the look of a logo and the typefaces you use and the way it's laid out on a page can create an emotional response in the customer. And they're especially heightened. They're especially sensitive to that effect on themselves. And so, you start to get some wisdom that then, well, what you really need is a really well-designed brand, and you need the right typefaces, and your website needs to look cool. And if you do that, then you're going to effectively sell to your customers, right? The direct response folks, they learned that if you use this particular structure in a sales letter that moves from one psychological hook to the next, and it tells a story in a particular way, then you can get someone who's never heard of an organization to run to the mailbox, write a check, put it in an envelope, and send it off because they think they're going to save the world.
Right.
Right. And so they have this list of very exquisitely defined techniques, like a unique mechanism or, particular kinds of headlines or things like that, that they know if they put those in the right order, a lot of times it gets people to buy. But at the end of the day, everyone's operating from a tactic first or extrapolating from an example of something that worked to try to infer, what happened, what works universally, right? So there's a lot of received wisdom that is right for some situations and sometimes, but doesn't apply everywhere. And that's where, when I was trying to make sense of this, I found that going back to the psychology really gave me ways to reconcile the tension between direct response and brand advertising and create new ways to figure out, well, what's the right tool to use in this situation for this client, speaking to their customers with the specific problems and desires that they have. And so that's really the kind of system I've developed is how can you make customer psychology practical to really quickly get to the message that needs to be in your marketing. What does your brand need to look like? What stories do you need to tell? How do you sell to the customer? All of those things. And so, collectively, I call that the company's message and vision. And that's what I like to help people establish.
And you refer to that process and framework as a facilitation
Yeah,
for a business owner. And you know what I because I'm a sales guy. I think like a sales guy, and you're what you just described and you know kind of putting all of those components together where you have the psychology and then you have these various tactics and sometimes people are just throwing out tactics without having a strategy. I equate that to you know a football uh, coach, a football team, right? If they don't have a game plan,
yeah,
right? They don't have a strategy, and they haven't put that like who's on our team. I mean, are we a we move fast, throw the ball down the field, and don't worry about defense kind of a team, or are we, you know, grind it out, running the ball? You have a set of plays, you have a set of that you can facilitate and deal with whatever situations that you have. You need to have robust tactics or robust plays in football analogy. But if you don't have a game plan that you know where your center is, you 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 start chasing shiny objects. And that nebulous idea of marketing for me is that's what it's always been. It's like, oh, that looks cool.
yeah.
That worked over there. I should do that. And I really think you need a brand that is, you know, respectable, that looks right, represents things. There's some psychology there, but then you got to figure out what does that mean, and how are you going to talk about it? What is it that you really do to help somebody, and peeling that back to the core. I mean, that's what my dumb sales brain heard um, with
Yeah,
what.
no, I think you're right. And, in some ways, it's a little more challenging today, right? Marketers aren't dumb, salespeople aren't dumb, right? The received wisdom became received wisdom because it works a lot of the time, or at
Mhm.
least it did work a lot of the time. And one of my kind of core theses is that in the last 20 years, from the perspective of sales and marketing, the world has really changed, and our tools haven't caught up with what's different. So
Right.
a lot of the marketing tools that you would learn in graduate programs or that you see in marketing books that get published every year owe a lot of their structure and ideas to things that Procter and Gamble and General Motors introduced in the 1920s. And funny as it is, marketing hasn't advanced that much further beyond that. There were people in the late 1800s who figured out how sales letters work. Those are the direct response folks that we talked about. And then the
Sure.
brand advertising folks really were some very innovative people at those two companies in the 1920s. And what they, developed is this idea of positioning, that you wanted to own a piece of geography, on a battlefield. The mind is a battlefield, and you want to occupy the most strategic territory in the customer's mind.
Right.
And that your brand then would remind people of your core value proposition relative to your competitors and bias them. The more positively that you could get them to think about your brand, the more biased the customer would be to prefer your product to your competitors. Now, all that presupposes that we're operating in a world of category based competition where there are a handful of brands that have the means to get nationwide or international distribution. So, in Procter & Gamble's case, what they were trying to do is compete against 3 or 4 or 5 products that were beside them on the same store shelf, right? The stores got customers in to buy the products. The customers would walk to the shelf with the product, the kind of category that they wanted, and you needed to convince them to pick up Tide instead of Whisk, right?
Right.
And so, and the means that you had to get your message out were similarly constrained. First it was radio advertising, then there was always print advertising in the background, but to really captivate people, it was first radio advertising, then TV advertising. And there were only so many channels and only so many hours available to put your ads. And, in order to keep the customers around, it couldn't be all ads. They had to have a program. And so, you had these 30-second slots to maybe say something. And, you can't say a lot in 30 seconds. So, they came up with these taglines that did most of the selling for them. So Tide was the detergent that you wanted, if you wanted your clothes to be super clean. and cheer was for if you were more interested in bright colors, right?
Right.
And so, they just said, okay, we're the detergent if you want this, and we're going to attract the customers who want that specifically. And that worked great if all you could do was a 30-second ad and customers didn't have effective means of broadcasting their opinions and they couldn't talk back and they couldn't talk to each other. Well,
Yeah,
now
that's
we live in a
tasteful.
world where, a small, social campaign for featuring a transgendered person that Bud Light maybe put, $1 million or $2 million against has resulted in them losing 33% of their sales because customers were up in arms and started talking back and started talking to each other. So it's a much more dynamic and dangerous and but also environment, but also an environment with a lot more opportunity. If you can harness the ability to build authentic, deep relationships with your customers, and you can develop a message that no matter how deep you go, really resonates with your customers' problems and desires, and you know even begins to interact with what they believe about the world to educate them in a way that prepares them to not just want your product or desire it, but to purchase it and become a fan of it. And there are a handful of companies that have really mastered that. It's something that I've come to calling kind of this new way to brand. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there in recognizing, hey, the constraints have been taken off. We can communicate with our customers in a more diverse way over more time, and actually build a much more stable competitive advantage than what you were able to do in this old world of finite finite attention and limited distribution.
So the tools in the marketing toolbox have just exploded, right? It's way bigger than it used to be. It's way more confusing for an entrepreneur or business owner. And but what I heard you say with all those things, with the what Bud Light does, what companies are doing with marketing to a very specific niche who cares about the environment or cares about global warming or cares about whatever they care about, you can niche that into that and speak to those people directly. But you still have the same issue that you had with Procter and Gamble, right? That those folks with that budget, can go be everywhere and go do certain things. And yeah, it's easier to misstep. But for the people that we're trying to help, that mid-size and up, it's freaking confusing to like, where do I need to be, right? Well, I don't want to say that because they're
Right.
going to piss those people off. Um, and it goes back to being authentic,
Yeah.
right? If you're just who you are, and that's not good enough, tough. Um, but I think if you can't be authentic if you don't really know what it is you want. And I mean, I speak to a lot of salespeople and I speak to a lot of business owners, and it's like, I ask a couple of really big, which some people think are dumb questions, but like, how do you go about selling something around here,
Yeah.
right? And they look at me like, what do you mean? I'm like, you sell the widget. How do you do it? And they can't describe it.
Right.
They haven't thought about it. And then they're just like get confused. And then what do you represent? Who's your niche? Who's your ideal customer, right? Well, I've got like 30 customers. Okay, but you probably sell to 10 of them to make up most of your revenue. Well, yeah. Okay, what do they have in common?
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? How do you not know this,
Right.
right? But and that's when we kind of I kind of want to wrap this in a bow. That's what we're going to talk about in this
Yeah.
series is getting that entrepreneur's brain to think differently about. It's not just to go tactical to do some SEO, to go do some content over here and to go create some silly videos, right? That are entertaining and get your brand out there, but is it all moving in the same direction or they're all going like a wagon wheel and we really don't know what one or the other one's doing? And I think that's where you're going to help us think about it differently, put it back together, come to the center. Here's our game plan. And then we have this sort of this Rosetta Stone to look at and be able to, yep, that's not part of the plan. That's really not who we are. We shouldn't do that, right? I mean, your
Yeah,
Bud Light example.
definitely. There's a lot to unpack there, but you
Yeah,
know,
we got time.
what?
We'll make time to do all that, but it's
Yeah,
not
no,
going to get done.
definitely. So, in the interest of wrapping this up today and maybe, setting the table for our next conversation, I think you're right that one of the biggest problems from an entrepreneur's perspective today is when it comes to marketing is the paradox of choice, right? For the small business person, medium-sized business person, the developments of the last 20 years, the advent of digital, Google search, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all those things, is that they've put tools in the hands of anyone that the Fortune 500 marketers couldn't have dreamed of 30 years ago. For $5, you can have an ad running 30 minutes from now, and then you're going to get incredible amounts of data on who clicked on it or who saw it, and what kind of interest did it have, and you'll be able to see what the customer actually did because when they go to your website, you can follow them around and see did they buy or what did they look at, and you can infer what questions they have. So that's all fantastic. The problem is that there's shiny object syndrome, right? Each new tool that comes out, it's like, oh, that's going to be the silver bullet. That's going to make things easy. Well, it does make things a lot easier. When I started out in advertising, for most small businesses, the only practical way we had to reach the customer was newspaper ads because they were a local business and or if they were business to business, it was trade publications and trade shows, and they were super expensive, right? You can reach your customers so much more cost effectively today, and you could do so, with a much greater control and speed to market and all of that stuff.
And accuracy.
Yeah, and accuracy too. It really makes performance-oriented marketing possible. But when you peel back all the complexity of all these different channels, at the end of the day, those are just ways to put a story or a message in front of your customer, right? And whether it's in a Google ad, it might have to be shorter. If it's on Facebook, you can do a 15-minute video, or if it's on YouTube, there's a variety of different ways to adapt it to the platform. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to what message are you putting out there, and is it able to move the customer in the direction you want them to, right? If you don't get that right, you're going to flounder around with marketing, and you're going to go chase after each,
Yeah, and you're not going to get an ROI, right? When we're back to the nebulous marketing idea, if you don't say the right things to the right people at the right time, right? You got to figure out where they're hiding. You got to figure out where they hang out,
yeah.
and there's some research. But in the idea of all that ads and the data that's available to us, those platforms, I was talking to somebody a couple weeks ago at dinner, and a pretty smart person, and like they didn't realize like how Facebook and these other social media platforms actually make their money.
Right.
Isn't is the data that they're mining from all the members who think they have this free platform. Nothing's free. We're giving away our soul of what we do, how we do it, what we think about it. All that's available. They're actually selling it back to those big Procter and Gamble type companies to know how to go reach these people, right?
Right,
Isn't
right.
that
Well, and the way they sell it back is through making their ads so much more effective. So the data that Facebook and Google accumulate allow you to say, okay, I want to show this ad, in the case of Bud Light, only to people who identify as transgender and are between the ages of 21 and 26, right? Or, whatever.
sure?
And it can be incredibly hyper focused, right? So you have the ability to speak to your ideal customer profile with a specificity that you never had before. Which creates all sorts of opportunities to tailor your message to specific audiences and things like that. And so you have many more different platforms to advertise on, and many more different executions on each platform, right? So there's a diversity. If you think of your message as just like literally what's in the ad, it's nearly limitless today. But I think strategically, the key thing for a company and the way to do this right is to figure out what your core message is. You know, what are the set of stories you need to tell that establish your reputation, you know, create customers to demand your product, persuade them to buy, overcome their objections, and even move the world of ideas in a direction that's favorable to what you want to do. And it turns out, I've found that for most companies, that set of stories is relatively small. The cool thing is that you can then version them in a variety of different ways to create endless variety. And you know, if we, you know, that's where Bud Light got in trouble, right? The story that it went out with the Dylan Mulvaney campaign was antithetical to everything it had said before to most of its customers, and in fact seemed to reject the, you know, psychology of the customers that they had been celebrating for 60 years or however long.
Well, it punched him in the nose, and the lady that it was allegedly responsible for that said that Bud Light was a dying brand and was losing, and it's been the number one light beer category for how long, right?
Yeah,
It
right.
was it was
And I mean,
all
you know, it is true that Bud Light sales have been declining a bit, but you know, it turns out that the craft beer revolution means there's a lot better beer to drink these days.
right.
uh, and people have become educated to maybe want something that tastes better. But you know, that doesn't mean that the brand itself is broken or its core promises are broken.
No, if you either decide to stop making it because you change. I mean, that's how some of those old beers that they changed their message. Like
Yeah,
I have a friend who drinks. Well, he used to drink Bud Light, but he used to drink Schlitz,
yeah,
right? If you go back, and they stopped doing that because of something that just changed their message about how they talked about their beer,
right.
and it felt not authentic. It felt like it was not what they were really about, and something's changed, and I'm uncomfortable. So if I'm uncomfortable, I'm just going to go grab this beer over here,
Yeah,
right? Because it's not about the taste of the beer. It's awful.
yeah,
All of those light beers, Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors Light, they all suck. Um,
yeah,
but
definitely. I think a topic that we'll have to talk about in the future is what is it that creates brand character and makes it relatable. And you know, there's this six-part framework that I think I've talked to you about before that
yep,
I found can, you know, really kind of quickly zero in on what the brand has to say in order to relate to customers. But for the purposes of landing this conversation, you know, I think the key mistake that Bud Light made is that they betrayed their message, and they thought that they could pander by, you know, inauthentically to a new audience and maybe, you know, bring the brand forward. And you know, this is, you know, one of the reasons why I think it's so vital up front for really any business owner to clearly establish the elements of the message and make sure that they have that strategy in place, and a strategy that has integrity so that it works together. Now you can always version your, you know, your brand stories to suit another audience or show how it relates to them. But when you betray the message itself, that's when you get into trouble.
yeah, and it's a, you know, it's I think a lesson learned. I think everybody, and it's not necessarily congruent with every other brand because you know the way people buy beer at a grocery store, you know they're all right there, like you
Right.
talked about before. They're all right there. You can easily just go here and do that. If with some products and services, you don't have a chance to go make that decision as easily. So again, I'm excited about these ideas, and we're going to just have to be really focused to help people be able to follow along here. We'll start with that whole idea of being authentic and what a brand really means and how we talk about it, and just start
Yeah.
moving through it. So
Oh,
again,
that
man,
sounds
thank
great.
you. I appreciate you agreeing to do this, and
No, likewise.
um,
I've enjoyed the conversation, and I hope it's helpful to people.
I think, and it's fun for Walter, and that's
Yeah.
part of the deal. So we'll have the ways to get a hold of you. Like what, I'll have them in the show notes. But what's the best way to reach you if
Yeah.
somebody's like, I
So
need to talk to this?
I've been using Zeggio Marketing Solutions as a name to kind of capture my consulting work, and you can find that at zegg.io. and then there's a way to schedule a call with me to kind of explore what you're hoping to accomplish, and we can at least give you some free advice, if nothing else. Like I said, this set of tools I've seen just really change, a number of businesses, dozens and dozens now. And, the cool thing that I like to see is that, people who go through this, sometimes this is a little 6 hour facilitation by the end of it, have a completely different understanding of marketing. And it's been really cool for me to see my clients go on to be able to provide the effective leadership for their internal marketing teams and their agencies that really only the entrepreneur can do.
Yeah.
Some of
You're
the
giving them a voice. You're
yeah,
giving them a real voice that somebody else isn't pulling out of them, and you're not sitting them in a room and torturing them to get it out. You're getting sitting them in a room and having them think about what they're really trying to accomplish and what their real purpose was, what their passions about, and who their people are that they need to reach.
yeah,
And
the
it,
business owner, in my experience, usually has most of the answers they already need to create effective marketing. They just haven't been trained to put it in a shape that marketers can work with. And the dirty little secret is that your agency or your internal marketing team um, is typically trained not to press too hard, to just accept the decisions that you've made that are evident in your business, rather than try to push against that a little bit and unlock some of the new opportunities in terms of offers and pricing and kind of core message. Their job, as they see it and as they've been trained, is to take what you tell them and make it sound better or look prettier.
yeah,
But what's really cool is when you ask the right questions. Often, new decisions emerge, and a vision, gets crystallized that then makes for a lot more effective marketing.
yeah.
And so that's kind of the sweet spot I like to work in.
And that's the facilitation piece that is really powerful. So we'll end it there. Thank you, man. Appreciate it, Matt. And
Yeah, really appreciate it, Walter. Looking forward to the next conversation, and hope this has been helpful to folks.